Good day to each and everyone. I am Bungar Halid Kilalo, and today I'll be discussing the article entitled Active Trilingualism in Early Childhood, the Motivating Role of Caregivers in Interaction by Sarah Chevalier, published in 2012. Okay, so this paper offers a profound look into how young children raised in multi-language environments navigate the complex world of language acquisition. My goal today is to go beyond the summary and provide a deeper understanding of the key takeaways, offering some insight into the practical implication of this research. So, to begin, the study focuses on language development of two young children in Switzerland who were exposed to English, French, and Swiss German from a very early age. It addresses a common misconception that simply exposing a child to a multiple languages is enough for them to become a fluent speaker of all of them. The research argues that active use is not automatic. It requires a crucial element, motivation. Okay, so without motivation, a child may passively understand a language but choose not to produce it. The study, therefore, aims to answer a few critical questions. First, to what extent do these children actually produce the languages of their caregivers? Second, is there a simple link between a caregiver's consistency in speaking their own language and the child's language use? And finally, what other factors might be at play that explain why one child becomes an active trilingual while another does not? Proceeding with the methodology, the research used a qualitative approach focusing on two detailed case studies rather than a large group of subjects. The two children were Lina and Elliot. Lina lived in German-speaking Switzerland and was exposed to three languages. Again, it was three languages, which were Swiss German from her mother, French from her father, and English from her aunt and her parents' conversations with each other. Eliot, on the other hand, lived in French-speaking Switzerland, and his language exposure was English from his mother, Swiss German from his father, and French from his daycare and brother community. The data was collected through a very thorough process, monthly recording of caregiver-child interaction for a full year from the time the children were just over 2 years old until they turned into three. This longitudinal approach allows us to see how language use evolves over time. A key point here is that all the caregivers in the study were very consistent. For instance, Eliot's father spoke Swiss German 96.57% of the time, and Lina's father spoke French for 89.11% of the time. This consistency, which is often seen as the golden rule of bilingualism, was a constant across the study. Yet, as we will see, it was not enough on its own. So, the key finding, language production. This is where the finding become truly revealing. Despite the high level of caregiver consistency, there was a stark difference in children's language production. Eliot became a high active trilingual using his caregiver language over 90% of the time. For example, when his father spoke Swiss German, Eliot responded in Swiss German. Lina's case, on the other hand, was completely different. Her French production with her father was a mere 13%. This means that when her father spoke French, she often responded in Swiss German. So you can see there the difference between the two respondents. The language of the community as well. So this finding is the central paradox of the study. If consistency is the key, why did it work for Eliot but failed so dramatically for Lina, right? So the paper clearly demonstrates that while consistency is necessary foundation, it is not sufficient. There are other powerful factors at play that shape a child's linguistic choices. Okay, let us proceed to slide number 5. So we have here factors influencing language choice. The researchers identified several contextual factors that help to explain this difference. The first was, of course, the position of the community language for Lina. The community language, Swiss German, was also her mother's language and was therefore dominant both inside and outside the home. The French and English were minority languages in every sense. In contrast, for Eliot, the community language, French, was not his home language. The languages spoken at home were English and Swiss German. Now, this created a clear distinction between home and outside the home languages. So you have to take note of that, which may have made it easier for him to maintain them. The second factor was the input from the speakers. Eliot had additional exposure to Swiss German from his paternal grandmother and family's friends. This provided him with a wider social network for using that language. Lina, however, had very little contact with other French or English speakers. The lack of wider community to practice the minority language with likely contributed to her low production. Okay, so uh, proceeding with the interactional style. This is actually, in my opinion, the most insightful finding of the paper. It is the caregiver interactional style that truly separates the outcomes from these two children. So let's take a look at Lena's father, who had a low involvement style rather. The article notes that he would often accept Lena's use of Swiss German and sometimes even answer his own questions, giving her a little motivation to respond in French. He was a passive participant in the conversation. Now, compare this to Eliot's father and Lena's aunt, who both had a high involvement style. The aunt, for instance, used what the paper calls language teaching techniques. An example from the study shows her saying is that a dog or a rabbit, she would persist until Lina gave the expected answer in English. Eliot's father also had an intense style, engaging in many turns and asking questions that encouraged a response in Swiss German. He would also explicitly translate items, making it clear which language was expected. For example, he might point to a book and say, "Look," in bunch using both Swiss and English to reinforce the vocabulary. The insight here is that caregivers who are not just consistent but also actively engaging create a conversational need for the child to use the minority language and is by far more successful in promoting active trilingualism. In conclusion, so what can we take away from this research? The study clearly demonstrates that while being consistent is a good starting point, it is not the final step. The key to active trilingualism is motivation. And the motivation is largely influenced by a few critical factors. In the study, the we observe that the caregiver's high involvement interaction style, the presence of a wider community of speakers, and the position of the community language. Now, as for my personal insight from this paper, is that the one person, one language rule is not a magic bullet. Instead, it should be a framework for an intentional, engaging approach. To truly support a child's active use of multiple languages, we must not only provide consistent input but also create a dynamic environment where the child feels motivated to produce the language, where they also have opportunities to connect with other speakers, and where their efforts are actively encouraged. Thank you very much, everyone, and that would be all for my report. If you're going to be having a question, you can just ask it during our reporting meeting period rather, and also you can leave questions to the activity or assignment task that Ma'am Berowa posted in our Google Classroom. Again, thank you very much for listening, and I hope every one of us is doing well. In conclusion, so what can we take away from this research? The study clearly demonstrates that while being consistent is a good starting point, it is not the final step. The key, the key to active trilingualism is motivation. And the motivation is largely influenced by a few critical factors. In the study, we observed that the caregiver's high involvement interaction style, the presence of a wider community of speakers, and the position of the community language. Now, as for my personal insight from this paper, is that the one person, one language rule is not a magic bullet. Instead, it should be a framework for an intentional, engaging approach. To truly support a child's active use of multiple languages, we must not only provide consistent input but also create a dynamic environment where the child feels motivated to produce the language, where they also have opportunities to connect with other speakers, and where their efforts are actively encouraged. Thank you very much, everyone, and that would be all for my report. If you're going to be having a question, you can just ask it during our reporting meeting period rather, and also you can leave questions to the activity or assignment task that Ma'am Berowa posted in our Google Classroom. Again, thank you very much for listening, and I hope every one of us is doing well.